Okay,
right.
we got the heathen joining us. My
So
twin bro, the heathen.
we'll we'll kind of start from the beginning. So typically, I'll ask one question. I already know the answer. You're both over the age of 18. Second question is typically, are you a believer? I know one of you is and one of you is not. So that's already done. So the third question then is the God that you believe in, is it the Christian God?
Yeah, I believe in the Christian God.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm a monotheistic. So yeah,
Okay.
and I think of the monotheistics, I believe that yeah, Jesus presents, I believe, the best manifestation or the most likely manifestation of the the special revelation of that God.
Sure. What would
But yeah.
be your most convincing argument for why the God that you believe in exists?
Yeah, that's a great question. And whenever somebody says convincing, right? I mean, that has a lot to do with obviously, what's persuasive or particularly compelling for an individual.
Right.
So what I would tend to say is where I find the strongest affinity for that, the monotheistic, and then in particular the Christian flavor ethos would be more of a cumulative case. Now, nothing we would present would be in that deductive realm of validation, but I would argue it from an abductive position, right? So, what we call like the inference to the best explanation. So, and coming from a cumulative case, and so often the way I would tend to present this, well, so when I do this individualistically, right, it's more of like try to more find out why it is that people don't believe, right? But if I'm just going to kind of, ad hoc come out with a presentation, again, I would say more of a cumulative, and I would classify the various cumulative arguments into, your philosophical arguments, your scientific arguments, your historical arguments, and then also moral arguments. So, and I don't know how much time I have
Well,
to give all those. So,
I mean, you got as much time as you need. Typically on Friday night, if I don't have to like work the next day or something, I mean, we'll go till like 2 in the morning, but I've been known to go longer if we're in the middle of a good conversation.
okay.
Yeah, you do.
Well, and what maybe is a good way to approach it is like, even if like maybe what I could do is lay out just sort of the high level bullet points, and then we can explore each one that people feel is the most interesting, or whatever would make the audience, I don't know, most interested in it. But
Well, I like some
how
of the
would that?
bullet points that you have so far. So the only thing
Okay.
I would highlight is that, like, when I have these discussions, I try to keep it specific to the God, right? So if I'm talking to a Muslim, I want to have a discussion about that particular God and not about a generic God. If I'm talking to a Christian, I want to talk about the Christian God specifically, right? Because,
Okay.
like, I can talk to somebody who's not part of a religion, and we can talk about whether or not there is, in fact, like a generic God that exists, like a prime mover. But to me, that's not really all that interesting, because um, getting from a prime mover to a specific God, I think, is the leap that nobody can actually make. Because if we're just doing a presuppositional argument, I can presuppose that Doug is the prime mover. You know what I mean? Like, there's no limit
Right.
to what you can presup. So to me, I'm interested in the specific God. So
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
got a
Well, and
couple
even
questions about
and
Christianity, though.
sure. Well, I mean, maybe we can even start there, and I agree. So I would say, and again, the cumulative case begins with establishing the basis for the monotheistic God, right? And then from there, then it's like, okay, what is the best, what we would call special revelation of that monotheistic God, which then lands into Christianity. So for the case for God, right? When we talk about that, right, it would tend to be non specific to Christianity in that sense, because that creates the scaffolding from which then we get into that the specific religion in that, right? But to be fair too, in many respects, Christianity is really more of like a neo Judaism. But but yeah. Anyway, but you said you had some questions. We could start there if you feel like that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, for sure. So there's like a couple sticky points I have with Christianity. I think the
Okay.
first sticky point is typically the problem of evil, which I suspect you're familiar with. The second
yeah.
point that I have is typically with the prophecies. I don't believe that the prophecies about the Messiah have been fulfilled. And then I think the third sticky point that I typically have with the God of this book is the moral argument. I think the moral argument can go a number of different ways depending on who I'm talking to, because some people want to take it down a philosophy route. Typically, philosophy, when we have that argument, is going to end up on some sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Typically, they try to say that they're objective moralists, but typically it really comes down to divine command theory. But that's a different argument. So one thing I would like to know then is my favorite argument, which I've never got a good answer for, is why is it? This is the problem of natural evil is what I call it, not the problem of evil. The problem of evil can be solved with free will. The problem of natural evil is a little bit different. So is God all good in your view?
Yes. In a manner of speaking, yes. Sorry, I don't mean to equivocate, but
No, it's okay.
100%. And by the way, I don't subscribe to divine command theory, but yeah, because I do think it does have some problems.
Yeah,
For sure,
it leads to some logical issues. Like, because if you press it far enough, then they have to make crazy concessions. So God is all good. Can we agree then that something that is all good would not purposely cause unnecessary suffering?
Would not cause it. Correct. Yes, correct. Not unnecessary. Sure.
Right. Okay.
There wouldn't be what we call gratuitous or unnecessary. Sure.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's where we have to ask the question then, what do we do with the fact that natural disasters exist? And can we agree that natural disasters do cause unnecessary suffering?
Yeah, well, we do. 100% natural disasters exist. No question, right? I think where good theologians on this matter would equivocate on is it unnecessary? We do live in a world where there is cause and effect, and there's certain what I would say impetuses for various acts of suffering, be it natural or even like human caused, whatever, and so certainly those causes, while permitted, right? So when we talk about God's providence, right, we typically put it into two camps, right? So there's his direct intervention, or what he is, what in Aristotelian terms would call the efficient cause, right? And then, but then there's also what Aristotle called the final cause, or would kind of like. I think a better way to describe that would be like the purpose of the cause. God has, in his providence, has his perfect will and his permissive will. And as I think one of our good Muslim friends was just talking about, was like, free will. We do allow for, or God permits for agency as part of the goodness, but allowing for that free agency. And again, I'm taking is from the posture of the assumption of a theistic worldview.
Brain, you have bars, hun.
Yeah. Is there a chance that you can connect to Wi-Fi? Your reception's getting weak.
That natural evil. I'm sorry, not natural evil. Sorry, I'm blanking on it. It's late, and I wasn't even prepared
That's okay.
to come into this discussion. But
I want to make sure that
the idea of that it's gratuitous or unnecessary. So this gets us into a realm that is a bit complicated to describe. But when you have a God who has the ability to know right the beginning from the end, so the like the omniscience from a non-time bound understanding of things can also see how even suffering itself can bring about good, right? So in an overly simplistic way to describe it is like we see how sometimes people can endure some grievous suffering, and yet out of that suffering experience great good, like be it the formative aspects of suffering. Alvin Plantinga wrote extensively on this, and he talked about the problem of evil as soul formation. and that the genesis of it was free will, and in allowing free will would precipitate, understandably, evil that was not part of God's perfect will, but in the permissive will can be used for the formative aspects of it.
So what I'm hearing is that
And
natural
so- and I-
disasters happen because God uses it to get his ultimate goal achieved.
Well, God can use natural disasters to bring about other goods, right? Okay, so and I know that sounds
Wait,
incomplete.
Can you
right?
can you help me understand what the other good
the
would
idea
be?
would be? Yeah. So okay. So from a philosophical standpoint, right? Some would ask the question is, okay, would say the natural disasters themselves do we know that they are not achieving any good?
Well,
or not
that's my
achieving
question
a
is
good.
what's the good that they're accomplishing?
Well, so that would be like and that's a great question, right? And then unfortunately, that's where we as limited finite beings can't say what is the actual good, right? We don't know. We're not privy to that. But what we can do is surmise potential goods.
Sure.
Right? So, for instance,
What
when
would
we
be a
understand the
potential good?
Thank you, Will, for the
Well,
$2 on Venmo.
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Oh no, she was
I
just
was
saying
doing a
that
shout out.
she was just saying thank you to someone that sent her a Venmo. Don't worry. I
Yeah.
promise we're with you.
Yeah, yeah. Let's like we could say, for instance, like somewhat seems like good, right? So the entrance of death, let's even just say, sounds right off the bat, like bad. But then too, when we understand, for example, the abilities for humanity to perpetuate evil and so forth, if let's say man did not, let's say, experience death, right, then humans would be capable of perpetuating like an eternity of evil.
Sure.
So even by allowing death, for example, would put boundaries or limits on the abilities for people to enact certain evils, right?
Right. So I'm thinking of, like, for
Yeah.
example, the hurricane, or not the hurricane. I mean, well, yeah, there was hurricanes too. But the earthquake that rocked Haiti, was it back in 2014 or something now? I forget. It's been a while, 2016, 17. Somebody help me with my memory. When did the earthquake hit Haiti that devastated?
I think it was 2014.
Yeah, there was about 200,000 people that were like unalived in that. What would be the thing that God needed to happen with that?
Yeah, well, like, so, oh gosh, there's so much that could be said on this, but like, one of the things that we think about, right, when we encounter a world that has very real threats, right, that's also the opportunity for mankind to be able to, like, protect and guard other humanity, right? So, for instance, like, a lot of these things like, a lot of the deaths occur because of humanity not taking proper precautions, knowing that there is death, right? And so this is also our, like, and sorry again, like, you caught me in a night too where I was already imbibing in a little bit of a
No, listen, we are. Look,
evening
both
aperitif, but
both of us together. We're doing it together.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So
Okay.
yeah, this was
hold
my
on just 1
atheist
second,
brother
Brain.
wanting me to get in here. So
The chat is saying that the earthquake happened in January 2010.
Yeah, that's when it was, 2010. I'll take this moment also to thank Scott. Thank you so much for the Venmo. Scott says 666 Hail Satan. Big W for Scott. I appreciate that.
When Scott.
So I'm trying to kind of get to the focal point here. So if we conclude that God uses, like, the hurricanes and things of that nature, and the earthquakes and whatnot, to bring about, like, an ultimate good, the problem I have is I can't seem to figure out what the ultimate good is that's being brought about by these things. But let's posit for a second that there was an ultimate good, even if we don't know what the ultimate good is, right? So if I grant that there could be something gained, we'll just grant that for the sake of discussion, right? The second question,
or if I could help, it might even just help where where what it comes back to is just asking the question, do we know that there isn't potentially any good that could come from it, right? And the integrous answer would be, well, no, we don't know that, right?
I agree.
So, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
So,
We can grant.
yeah.
We can grant that something good can come from it, but
Right.
that leads us back to another question, which I think is even more important, which is what I wanted to get to, which is, does God have the capability of bringing about the same result, but without the natural disaster?
Well, okay, so right, so this gets into just a philosophical surmising, right? But we would say, well, if he could come to the same outcome, right, without as much suffering, right, he would,
Yeah.
right? But that's more of like an article of faith, and I forgive me for using that term because I think it's also very much misused, but right, it's taking on if we understand the character of God, right, it's also like there's a postulate of, right, like that God created the best of all possible worlds, right? So if there's a good God and he was going to create a world, he would create the world that is the best of all possible worlds. Not everybody agrees with that statement per se, but right, if we just maybe...
No, I agree with that. If he exists
then
and he created the world, it would be the optimal world.
Right. And so then by corollary, taking that premise, right? But see, again, all of that is predicated on understanding, okay, one, can we establish that there is good reasons to believe in a God, right? And then two, is there good reasons to believe that that God is good, or let's just say all good? And then if so, and he was the progenitor of this existence, then of course it would, by corollary, then lead us to think, yeah, this is the best of all possible worlds.
Well,
to bring about his ultimate good.
I think we agree on that. I think the thing that we're trying to figure out here, and I laid out a little bit of a double-edged sword, and I don't know if you bit on it yet, but the double-edged sword is basically this. If God has the capability of achieving his goals, whatever that goal is, if he has the ability to do it without the natural disasters, and he chooses to use the natural disasters anyways, then he's causing unnecessary suffering and he's not all good. But if it turns out that he's not capable of bringing about his end goal without causing the suffering, then that means he's not all powerful. So now we've got a little bit of a standoff here.
Yeah. But yes, 100%. In everything you said, taking those premises, that's absolutely true, right? The question would be if God could have done it another way, right? So again, this comes back to that it's an article of faith of that we trust that God created the best of all possible worlds to bring about is the maximum good, and so if he could, he would have done it different, but he couldn't because this would bring about the best of all possible worlds.
Okay, so is God able to bring about his end goals without natural disasters?
He's not able to bring about the maximum good without the natural disasters. As difficult as that is to chew on, and that. Man,
so then he's not all powerful.
We could spend no, he is all powerful. In the sense that, right, what God can't do is he can't make a three-sided square, right?
Sure.
So
he can't do logical absurdities.
Right. So in this sense, it's like there is something. Again, the article of faith is that in some manner, right, God created this world in such a way with the natural disasters that we experience because it's the best of all possible worlds to bring about the best possible good.
Sure, but to me that's
if he could do it differently, he would have.
But to me that's a faith statement, right?
No, right. That's why I qualified this statement of saying, right, that this is an article of faith. It's not it's not like I can create a scientific deduction on it, and because too, right, we aren't privy to then the ultimate consequences of all of this and how all of it plays out, right? Any natural disaster that happens in Haiti in 2018, right, is going to have repercussions that last for millennia. And we don't know what those ripples do. We just have to take it on some form of faith, again, built upon the edifices of one, understanding that there's the reasons for God's existence. Two, that God is an all good, all moral being, right? And then therefore all powerful. And I'm sorry, and also all powerful. From those arguments, then you would surmise then from an article of faith, then well, this must be the best of all possible worlds. So then you just ask, since we can't articulate that we know for sure that it wasn't ultimately good for those things to come about, we have to take it on faith. So I 100% agree.
Okay, so in your position then, God is just not able to bring about what he needs to do unless he has the natural disasters.
Yeah, need. I would just say he's not able to create the maximum good in another permutation. Otherwise, he would have chosen that other permutation.
Right. So
of existence.
So then, by logical deduction, there's something he couldn't do.
What? Well, he couldn't do something that is logically inconsistent, right? So he could have created a different existence, like say without natural disasters, but then they wouldn't bring about the corollary of whatever is.
But that's
the
not
good that comes from those.
But that's not a logical issue. So logical would be like P and not P, right? There's a logical contradiction. There's no logical contradiction here. You're just saying that God needed to use one particular method to reach his goals, and he couldn't use method number 2. So, for example, if his goal in unaliving 100,000 people in Haiti via an earthquake is that 400,000 people would draw closer to him, that may be true. That
Sure,
could have happened, right? But that's also, to me, a little bit silly, because God could have done any number of things to get that same result. He could have sent somebody with a prophecy or a healing miracle that was so persuasive that 100,000 people were able to witness the miracle and they all came to see God. So all I keep hearing is that God is not able to do something, which means God is not all powerful.
Yeah, no, and I totally appreciate what you're saying, but what you're saying, right, is that he could have, but what we don't know is that would have brought that about, right? We all, and it's a tragedy, right? And it's always so difficult to talk about these things because, of course, right, we existentially experience these things as great tragedies, and so we know that, right? And my heart goes out to the Haitians that suffered in all of this and the people that they lost, right? So I never want to discount that. So it's always tough because you don't want to minimize that. But let's even just say, like, okay, so if we take from the theistic framework, right, we understand that this life is finite. Everybody here is going to die. We all agree with that, I'm presuming. And yet, when in the context of the ramifications or the profundity of eternal life, right?
That's a good word.
What is the eternal life in comparison to the premature, I'm using air quotes, the premature loss of a finite life, right? Or let's say even hundreds of thousands. Like you could take hundreds of thousands of lives of a finite life, right? And compared to even one life that's eternal.
Yeah, I hear you.
Life is the profundity of that is unspeakable.
Right, but my problem is not just that people pass away early. My problem is that like pregnant women with nursing children are being crushed in apartment buildings that are collapsing in on them. Right. So I would have to believe that the God who caused this natural disaster, the God that spoke things into existence, that knows the beginning from the end, that he could have found a way to bring people to his ultimate goal without causing untold amount of suffering.
Yeah, and we might think that, right? And I get that, right? I mean, that feels like, right, that like, why couldn't he? And I get that, right? And there's, and I don't want to dismiss that. But one thing, right? Okay, so let's even take existentially the experience of just the one woman who's being crushed, right? Again, horrible tragedy. But we don't know per se, for example, how she experienced that from a transcendent, like, maybe at those last moments, this was the one way that God figured out how she would cry out to God and in humility just submit herself to God,
But
and then find eternal life in that crushing. If somebody came to you and said, hey, I'm going to give you an exchange, right? You're going to get crushed for a bit, right? It's going to, and it sucks, it's tragic, but in exchange for that crushing, you will have eternal life, right? You
but
take that.
in order to believe that, though, right? In order to believe that, you also have to believe that God couldn't do it any other way, which means you have to give up the idea that he's all powerful.
Yeah, well, and maybe he couldn't. Okay, so let's just take like just a really overly simplistic hypothetical, right? Let's say for this one lady, right, who's getting crushed. Maybe that was because God with his foreknowledge understood the only way that she would come to that submission is through these circumstances, right? And or I'm localizing this to just like say the experience of one person, right?
But it still limits God's ability, my man. That you're still every time you say that this is the one scenario in which it would happen, you're limiting God's ability. You're saying God couldn't do it another way.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So where the response to that would be, it's not that God God couldn't. It's not that he couldn't do it if, let's say, he was going to, by divine decree, like cause it through the efficient cause. But what God, right, again, so Plantinga dealt with this pretty extensively in his work, right, about free will. So it was kind of like in operating and allowing for the agency of free will, he knew that for this woman, for example, the only way that she would freely maybe come to God, again, this is totally hypothetical, right, but that this was the one way for her to then cry out to God and submit herself to that. Whereas like God maybe knew like, gosh, there's all these other permutations and that she wouldn't. And again, because we're localizing this into a hypothetical about a single person, we might even think of it as a way like maybe God could have saved her in 1,000 ways, right? But then this was the one way where there was a myriad of different people that were impacted in such a way and for millennia that came to salvation through this event. That we don't know, we can't see as finite beings, but that God could see and say, okay, but bringing about this unfortunate tragedy, right? And I don't believe that God is the efficient cause of natural disasters, but
wait, what do you mean you don't think he causes it?
Yeah, I personally, right, and this is again, I'm not speaking on behalf of Christendom, but I don't believe that he's the efficient cause. That is part of the curse of the world that we were subjected to.
I knew we'd get there eventually.
Yeah.
Okay,
but,
so
natural disasters and so forth from other free choices of other agencies, right? So in the Christian theology, right, there's agencies that are involved, even super powerful beings.
Right. So there's two ways out of this problem. The first method, which is that God needed to do it this way because he couldn't do it any other way. The second method,
in light of free will, to not violate free will.
Well,
of humanity.
He's not opposed to violate free will. He violates people's free will all the time. He violated Abimelech's free will when Abimelech wanted to have time with Sarah, right? He violated Pharaoh's free will by hardening Pharaoh's heart.
I guess I'm yeah, well, and I'm so that's often been put forth, right? When we say hardening the heart, that's an idiomatic expression of what God is doing. Is he's no longer preventing the person to manifest what they want, or in some respects, what they does is he gives them over to their desires, and allows them to express their freedom in that. So it's actually an expression of the freedom that the person has, and where God allows the person to do what's in their heart and soul to do. And it comes from a Hebraic idiomatic expression of the understanding of the hardening of heart. But
I'm pretty familiar with Hebraic expressions. It says here in Exodus 10, the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his officials."
Yeah.
So correct. Is God hardening their heart?
Yeah, again, to understanding the idiomatic interpretation of this. And again, right, there are people that debate this, right? So Even there are some Christians that would say, right? So there are some who are deterministic Christians who would say, yeah, no, God absolutely did that, right? So I want to make sure that I'm being clear that I'm speaking from a certain camp, but probably more of the majority camp. But
because there's two
again, there are
words
Christians that would disagree with me. Yeah.
There are two words that are used in the book of Exodus to refer to the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. One is kavod, which means to make heavy, and the other one is chazak, which means to like make firm or make strong. For example, you might recognize the name Hezekiah. It has the root chazak in it. And that's what God is doing. God is chazaking Pharaoh's heart. He's making Pharaoh's heart strong. In fact, if we looked it up in the Hebrew, I can almost guarantee it's going to be in like the hofal or the nefal verbal stem, meaning it's passive.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
no, I get it. Yeah. And again, that's why the translators have translated it that way.
Right.
Because it's the best way to express it in the way that was done. And yeah, we have to understand authorial intent and
Sure.
and the idiomatic like understanding of that. But
So
yeah, I get it.
God does.
And again, I would speak to. Sorry, go on.
God does step on people's free will in the Bible all the time. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, well, people debated that. So again, and I come from a camp that would tend to disagree with that there are explanations for each of those. But again, I don't speak for the entirety of Christendom. But yeah.
Sure. So my point is, God can and will step on people's free will when he needs to in order to accomplish his goals, and that's fine. He's allowed to do that. So again, we keep coming back to a problem where God, you keep getting to a point where God needs to use natural disasters to accomplish his will. But if God needs to use the natural disasters to do the goal, to get his goal, then that means somehow he's limited. He can't do it any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from. I don't ascend to the premise that that God does step on people's free will. That what God does is ultimately allows for the libertarian agency of people. But that's a long discussion. And yeah,
Have you read the story of Abimelech?
Yeah, I've read the whole Bible. I don't recall what the Abimelech story is about, but.
Yeah, in the narrative of Abimelech, God literally says, I have kept you from sinning. Hold on. Genesis 20. There we go. So Abimelech, actually twice, Abimelech gets himself into some deep trouble. Once with Isaac, once with Isaac's father, Jacob. Says, then God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. Furthermore, it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Meaning he intervened in this man's free will.
Yeah. Well, so there are other theologians that would respond about there's a providential work of God that is not where he's not operating as the efficient cause of that. Right, but that he also is the author of bringing about, like the unfolding of all events. Right? So when God decreed the genesis of existence, right, in a sense that decree, which was not time bound for him, right, we experience it in the unfolding of time, but for God, he didn't. The decree was universal from beginning to end, and so all that decree was how he decreed that all things would unfold. Now, in Aristotelian terms, that doesn't mean that it was necessarily he's the efficient cause of those things, right? But he's the teleological cause of those things, in the sense by bringing about a certain permutation of the way that this universe would unfold through the agency, knowing the agency of mankind, right? That would keep him from that. So
what he says, though, specifically, so the root word here that we find, it's obfuscated because of the conjugation, but the root word is natan, which means to give. It's translated here to mean I did not let you, which is you find the negative here low. So the natan here means I did not give you, and then this is actually the infinitive here. My finger can't go that far. This is in the infinitive form, which is why you find the lamed at the beginning of the word naga, which means to touch, or sometimes it can be emphatic for strike. But here it says, I did not give you to touch her. He didn't allow this man to touch the woman. He interfered with the man's free will because the man did want to touch Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And I guess I would run the risk of sort of just repeating myself of like the providential work of God, not as necessarily the efficient cause of those things.
So God didn't cause it to happen.
Once again, I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire of Christendom, right? So there are many Christians, right, the determinists, who would absolutely affirm what you're affirming. So I'm taking it from a different theological basis.
Right. So when it says that God disallowed somebody from doing what they wanted to do, that's not God interfering with their free will.
Correct. So I would argue, for example, like God has brought about certain circumstances in my existence, knowing that, like, so if I even take it from a personal standpoint, right, things have happened in my life that were to bring about a certain outcome where I'm still operating with a libertarian agency, and but it prevented me from doing something. Right, so without interfering with my free will, it still brought about his providential end.
All right, so the text just doesn't mean what the text says.
Well, from the theological basis of I'm coming from, it means something that right, it's pointing to the providential work of God. So
right.
So I would argue that the authorial intent was to continue to hold to God, divine providence. Right, but without the compromise of human free will, and God not being the efficient cause of that.
Sure, but
rather the teleological cause of it.
Sure, but the problem with the interpretation that you're providing is I have to now look at the text and say that the words don't mean what they mean.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's exactly true. It's just that it means. It comports, or my interpretation can comport with the language of the text. God did prevent that, right? So
yes,
I can
he did prevent
absolutely
it. Yes,
affirm that
he did.
God prevented that, right?
Yes.
And
why did
that works entirely?
Why did God?
Providential
Why
framework.
did God need to prevent it? Also, Frank, thank you for the 666. Frank sent 2666. I appreciate that, Frank. Frank says this is one way Christians justify abuse. God's just putting you through trials to test your faith. I agree. It's kind of Stockholm syndrome. And he says this guy's doing Olympic level gymnastics, not admitting the obvious. I think actually he's trying to use an interpretive framework that works for him, but it doesn't work for me, because in order for this interpretive framework to work, you just have to keep changing the meaning of the word. It's like when it says God prevented somebody from doing something, obviously a thing that they would have done without God preventing them from doing it, then God changed the course of events. He altered somebody's free will decision.
Yeah. Well, so I think, I would just again argue from that providential same framework, and again, I wouldn't.
Let me ask you a question.
This justifies abuse. So,
this one's easier. Sorry, I'm not leveling that accusation against you. This one's easier. Okay. Okay. So the barren women in the Bible is a common trend, and then God steps in and allows them to bear children.
Right.
He's literally changing the course of history. He's stepping in and he's changing the course of history by altering physics. Right. So
So we don't deny God's special intervention, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Special intervention is not denying free will, right? So when God takes a barren woman and makes her fertile, right? He hasn't changed that woman's free will. Would you agree?
No, he's changing the possibilities of their decisions.
Yeah, he's changing. Yes, he's absolutely right. He's changing the trajectory of history, and he's changing the allowed, like, let's say, buffet of choices available to those ladies. But what he hasn't done is subvert their free will when he has given them the ability to be fertile when they were once barren.
Well, he does
Would you
subvert
agree?
free will, as we've already discussed. But the point that I'm bringing up here
Well,
is that if
so what choice? Well, can I press on that
why
for just a question?
why
And just ask.
why is
What
God
was the choice that he was not allowing them to make? Like, where was it then they were not permitted to make a choice in light of the circumstances of things that were
who
happening?
who opens and closes the wombs according to the Bible?
Well, God.
It's God. Okay, so if
Right.
I will
Yeah.
to have a child, but God doesn't open the womb of my wife, whose will is causing the baby to exist?
Right. Well, God's will is bringing about the baby to exist if indeed, yeah, the person chooses then to have a baby once they're fertile.
That's
They would
right.
still need to make the choice, right? So now they have the choice, where before they didn't have the choice. He gives them then the choice.
So Isaiah 66 verse 9, he says, "Shall I open the womb?" Oh no, that's not the one I was looking for. Sorry, I'll find it here in a minute. But the fact of the matter is, from the Bible, we're told over and over that God is the one that opens the womb. So if God is willing to step in and alter the course of history, send natural disasters, harden people's hearts, at what point do we not just admit, yeah, God will step in when he needs to, and he'll do what he needs to do to accomplish his goal. And sometimes the thing that
He'll
he
intervene.
needs, sometimes the thing that he
Yeah.
needs to do is intervene on somebody's free will.
Yeah, and I would just articulate that I'm using different nomenclature, right? Is that it's that he's intervening, for sure, but that is not a subversion of somebody's free will to be able to choose something like in light of whatever the circumstances. So, I mean, I guess using another analogy, if let's say you had a paraplegic, right? The paraplegic doesn't even have the ability to choose to run a marathon, right? But if God suddenly, let's say, healed their legs, right, gave them strong legs that could, right, this person could then make the choice to then train and run a marathon, right? Whereas, where before they didn't have the choice, so they weren't able to. So yeah,
Right.
so there is the intervent.
Yes.
God does intervene, right? But then
God-
again,
But he does intervene. We've already read two
100%.
passages. We've already read two passages where God specifically intervenes in somebody's free will decisions.
yeah, and I don't know of any Christian theologians, and I would presume any of the other monotheistic religions, but that would deny God's intervention. That God does have direct intervention into this world to help bring about
agree.
his
Okay.
goals.
All right,
But
so-
we just, again, I think what we're equivocating on is whether or not that is a subversion of somebody's free will choices.
Yeah, if he can harden your heart and he can prevent you from sinning, from doing the action that you want to do, then obviously he's intervening on your ability to choose certain things. But
But and again, the hardening of heart is to allow the idiomatic understanding of it.
all right, well,
is
let's just dig
he's
into
allowing the person. Yeah, he's allowing the person to express the fullness of what's actually in
that.
their
Okay,
desire.
all right. Let me ask you a question. Okay, how many plagues were sent on Egypt?
Oh, I don't remember.
There's 10
You tell me.
plagues. There's 10 plagues sent on Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If
Okay,
if
okay.
Pharaoh was never going to relent, right? He was never going to let them go. Why would God need to harden his heart?
He wouldn't, but he did bring about the letting them go.
But
right?
but that
So we do know that what God did.
You're
was
moving to
intervene.
you missed it. You missed
sorry,
it.
go ahead.
You missed it.
Sorry.
If Pharaoh
ahead.
was never going to let them go, if his heart was never going to soften, then why would God need to harden his heart?
What God did was allow his heart to express what it wanted. God, knowing that what he was going to do was intervene to bring about his will.
Right, but
Right.
his
So not changing Pharaoh's choice and free will to bring about to do it. Right.
but that's what it means to
allow
harden
for the
somebody's
agents-
heart.
No, right. Well, and that's again, that's where we're equivocating. And I speak from the non-deterministic Christian camp of that God is not becoming the efficient cause of Pharaoh's choices. God is relenting to allow Pharaoh to express the fullness of his free will.
But why does God need to do anything if Pharaoh's not going to let him go?
Well, God needs to do something in order to. I guess I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just not understanding the question.
Okay,
Because
listen.
God does.
If
God is getting him to let him go. God knew how to
if
get him to
Pharaoh
let
is
them
not
go.
going to let them go, okay? Why does God need to do anything? Why is God at all doing anything with the Pharaoh? If Pharaoh's already going to do what God wants him to do, then why does it continuously say that God hardened his heart?
Yeah. Okay. I think if I'm understanding your question right, if God is going to, right, what God is allowing, He knows that Pharaoh's not going to let them go, right? And that what that expression is saying is like, yeah, God is allowing Pharaoh to manifest that he's not going to let them go, save the 10 plagues, right? So God, knowing that the 10 plagues would ultimately bring it about, but He allowed for Pharaoh to not do it without the 10 plagues, right? Because that was Pharaoh's free will to go that direction.
Then why
I don't
did
know if I'm
God need to
making it
harden his
clear.
heart? If Pharaoh wasn't going to let them go, which is what God wanted, why does God need to step in and harden his heart?
Yeah, what God was doing was, again, yeah, and maybe I'm not articulating this well, so forgive me. It's that what Pharaoh's heart was is to not let them go. The expression was God providentially, right, allowed for that free will to manifest, knowing that He then had His plan of agency to intervene and to get them to get Pharaoh to let them go.
Well, so why does the
So
text
so so
continually say that God hardened his heart if Pharaoh's heart was already hard and he wasn't going to let him go? I don't know why this is so
yeah.
difficult.
Yeah, and when we say yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm maybe not even
Does
articulating
Hebrew
this
not
well.
have a way to say that Pharaoh did what God wanted?
Well, the Hebrew is trying to articulate God's providence. That was what was happening was the unfolding of God's providential plan,
Can you show me
right?
one other time in the Hebrew Bible where somebody did exactly what God wanted and it says that God hardened their hearts?
Another time of God hardening their heart. There was I'm trying to recollect. Um, I can't think of it. If I think of it, I believe that there's another time in which God hardened somebody's heart, but I can't recall.
Yeah. Listen, God doesn't need to do anything. If Pharaoh's doing exactly what God wants him to do, then there's no need to ever say that God hardened Pharaoh's heart and the heart of all of his officials. Because his officials in the
Yeah,
narrative even say, they start chastising Pharaoh. They say, Pharaoh, how long are these plagues going to continue? We're all going to die here. Let them go. And then God
yeah,
hardens their heart, and he tells them why. He tells them exactly why he's going to harden their heart. It's in Exodus chapter 10. Let me read it for you. Oh, sorry, wrong button. There we go. The Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his officials, in order that I might show these signs of mine among them, that you might tell your children and grandchildren how I have made fools of the Egyptians and what signs I have done among them, so that you may know that I am the Lord. God is literally saying that I've hardened Pharaoh's heart in order so that I can continue these plagues, so
yeah,
that I can demonstrate how awesome I am.
yeah,
So
yeah,
this is
yeah.
God
Understood.
intervening.
So yeah, no, and most certainly God's intervening, right? And so okay, so if we interpret this passage from the divine providence, right, that God was one, He was allowing Pharaoh, right, from the idiomatic right understanding of hardening of heart, is that He was allowing Pharaoh to resist letting the Hebrews go at the time, knowing though that God was God in his omniscience, right? Knowing what He was going to do in order to bring about the release of the Hebrews, and doing it in such a manner as this passage is saying, right, that would also manifest God's glory, right? So in one sense, bringing about a good of allowing the free agency of Pharaoh to operate the fullness of what was in his heart to do, and God was going to intervene and bring about a glorious redemption of His people.
I don't know if that actually
I don't know if
addressed
I'm
what I'm
helping.
talking about. I'm talking about why
Maybe not.
God was doing anything. So maybe we'll agree to disagree.
Or let's say maybe,
I see
maybe
the
if we
text
say
very
this.
clearly. What the text is saying is that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. My position is that when the text says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, I believe that the text means what it says.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're just interpreting what that idiomatic expression means differently.
Can you show me anywhere in any Hebrew literature ever where God hardening somebody's heart means that he's just letting them do what they want?
Yeah,
And if I can chime in too, doesn't this imply that had God not hardened his heart, that Pharaoh would have, in all probability, let them go sooner?
That's literally the point that I've been trying to make, and that's the same
okay,
point.
yeah, understood. And then and that's where I thought. Then I think I just pieced it together. That's what you're trying to say.
That's the same point Apostle Paul makes in Romans chapter 9.
Of which part of Romans 9?
Romans 9. This is the most famous passage for the Reformed movement.
Right.
It says, not by works, but by his call, she was told, the elder shall serve the younger, as it is written, I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau. What then are they to say? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means, for he says to Moses, I have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So it depends not upon human will or exertion, but on God who shows mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show my power in you, that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So then he has mercy on whomever he chooses, and he hardens the heart of whomever he chooses. Mm-hmm. And this is all a justification for why some people are destined for hell, even though they were designed to be sinners. It says, you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But who indeed are you, a human, to argue with God? What is molded, say to the one who molds it, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one object for special use and another for ordinary use? What if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience the objects of wrath that are made for destruction? He made me for destruction.
Yeah. And the non-deterministic Christian camps have dealt extensively with this passage, right? And understanding that this is a reference back to the Jeremiah 16 passage, which talks about jars of clay, right? And that the potter, right? So there's a potter who is dealing with clay, and those who understand like the pottery world, like as a potter makes something, right? That there's certain clay that makes like the nature of the clay allows for it to form certain objects, right? So the potter, in his wisdom of pottery, right, would make the proper vestibule out of the clay, depending upon the essence of the clay. So there's a lot of Christians who have a lot of Christian theologians who have dealt with this from a non-deterministic vantage, basically saying that what God is doing is like the potter who is the potter brings about an end of it, but the essence of the clay, it also helped to dictate what was going to be the end result of that.
Yeah, but the passage doesn't say
Jeremiah
that.
16.
I'm going to do a little commercial break real quick because the council is... Anyway, be sure to tap the screen, guys. Share the live. Let's see if we can get host up to 500K likes. We are at 111. Make a wish, my lovelies. Thank you all so much for the Venmos, Cash Apps, the gifts, supporting the live stream, not only through TikTok, but also via Twitch and YouTube, and the super chats as well. Keep showing the love. We still got some time to go. And on that note,
right. Thank you so much, Hanji. Also, Bridget, thank you for the $3 over Venmo. Bridget says the guest is very respectful. Looks like God gave one brother glasses and the other blinkers. Oh boy. Listen, don't pay attention to the commenters, okay? They're all...
That's okay. I don't take offense to it. Well,
okay.
Right.
So
can I address, because I think David, my twin brother, brought up a great point, and I think that's where maybe I was missing where you guys are coming from.
Well, I want to address your clay thing real quick.
Okay.
Right. So you said that something about the substance of the clay, but he says, here we go. Why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But who indeed are you, O human, to argue with God? Will what is molded say to the one who molds it, why have you made me like this? Meaning God makes you a particular way. And he says, has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one object for special use and another for ordinary use? So in the analogy, God uses the same clay for all humanity and makes out of the same lump some people for special use and some people for dishonorable use.
Sure, yeah, and like the potter can take the same lump of clay and make multiple vegetables,
Right. And
but
if
and
he made
let me see
me,
if I can pull up the
if he made me a vessel for destruction, that's against my free will. I have no choice but to be that vessel of destruction.
yeah again and so again from the providential standpoint would say that the manifestation of this existence is such that yes, it would ultimately come about to that end, right? But it would not be a subversion of your free will. It would be that, let's say, for example, that you freely were still able to choose in light of, right, all of the circumstances of this existence, right, to take the path that you're at. Which, by the way, I know there was a discussion earlier about the eternity of hell. I actually don't subscribe to that.
That's fine.
An annihilationist, and so I don't believe that there's eternal conscious torment.
Yeah, you like soft
Right?
hell.
Yeah.
John 6:44. No one can come to me.
I like conditional immortality.
Sure,
Is
that's
what it
fine. No, I actually I'm fine with that. John 6:44. No one can come to me unless drawn by the Father who sent me.
Yeah, correct. Right?
Okay, so I can't come to God unless He draws me.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's in the
So?
we classify that prevenient grace,
Free will.
right? So that well, no, it's
Can
the
I
draw,
choose to come to
right?
God?
Can you choose? Well, so I would argue yes, you can.
Can I
right?
choose to come to
must-
God
but
without
prior-
Him
but-
first calling me?
Right, without God having that prevenient grace for you to be able to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that prevenient grace, for example, in many dispute, right? What constitutes the prevenient grace, right? So in the softest sense of it is there's the provisionist camp who would argue that just by the mere fact of Christ's death on the cross and resurrection, right, that is the prevenient grace, right? And offers that. So without that, right, God has now created the substance of faith that allows to draw you, right? So without that, right, you couldn't come to God.
Sure.
But now you still have the ability to freely then, in light of that prevenient grace, to make that choice.
Can I come to God unless God has drawn me?
No.
Oh, then I don't have the free will to come to God. That's easy enough.
Well,
there you go.
No, the prevenient grace would say there's universal prevenient grace, right? So God offers that grace to everybody.
Okay,
right?
so He's
You
called
then,
everybody.
in light of, and so you can't. Right?
Did He draw everybody?
Well, I think so. I argue. I come from a camp that does believe in universal prevenient grace.
Okay, so in John
So, yeah,
6:44,
but everybody's
where it
been
says,
afforded-
"No one can come to me unless drawn by the Father who sent me, and I will raise up that person in the last day." That means if God is drawing everybody to Him, then that person would be raised up in the last day, which means all people would be saved. Are you a universalist?
No, I'm not. What the passage is not saying is that when God draws everybody, they will necessarily come. So
Okay.
What it is saying is
Did-
that prior to somebody coming, right, God must draw them, right? And so if we take it from the
So
the
was Paul
universal
wrong
prevenient
in
grace-
Romans chapter 9 when he says, "Who can resist His will?" Can anyone resist God's will?
Can they resist? Can they resist His providential will? No.
Okay, so if God calls you, if God draws you and you can't resist His will, then that means you will go to heaven. You will be raised up on the last day, which means the people that don't get raised up on the last day is because God didn't call them.
Yeah, no, and I get it. It's a difficult abstract concept, right? So this comes, and I don't know if I'll be able to do justice to it in this discussion, right? But where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought. That's
right.
what happens when you're two glasses into Cabernet.
No, Brian. Or what's your name?
anyway,
I
I'm
can't call
sorry.
you
Where were
Brian.
we?
I keep calling you Brian because your
It's
name says
Tyler.
Brain. Tyler. Yeah, Tyler. Tyler.
Yeah, my name's Tyler. Yeah.
We got some time left, but I suspect both of us are going to get a little bit imbibed and a little bit tired. So let's not beat this dead horse completely dead. I want to talk about my favorite subject ever.
Would it help to read Jeremiah? Oh, okay. Yeah, let's do it.
My favorite subject ever. I'll never get tired of talking about it. I would talk about it every live if my people would listen to me. They might. Would you guys listen to me every live if I did nothing but talk about the prophecies of the Messiah?
Don't I do that?
Hanji does.
I do that?
Hanji does. All right, so it's my contention that Jesus fulfilled exactly 0 messianic prophecies. 0. Which is why I don't believe that he's the Messiah.
Sorry. Thinker's here.
Thinker, thank you for being here. Good to see you. Thank you for the hat and mustache. Guys, I know everyone here probably already follows Thinker, but if you're not following Thinker, make sure you do. She's absolutely delightful. In fact, when I get offline, she might be online. So here's my question for you. Now, I know everyone's favorite passage is Isaiah 63, but we'll waste the whole rest of it alive covering Isaiah 53.
Yeah, 53. Yeah, 53, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'll make you a deal, and I'm going to make this deal, and it's a fair deal because you went to school, you're educated. And this is my deal. If you can find even one messianic prophecy that Jesus fulfilled, then I'll cover Isaiah 53 top to bottom with you.
Okay. Let's see. The ones that were fulfilled, and mind you, by the way, it's been a while since I've studied this, so I wasn't prepared to I was prepared to defend the existence of God. But
don't worry.
And by the way, I
you came in cold
Jeremiah
turkey.
16. Yeah, I did mistakenly. I referenced Jeremiah 16. It's actually Jeremiah 18, where it talks about the potter's clay. So anyway, sorry. Just as an aside. As far as fulfilled prophecies that Jesus fulfilled, right? We could talk about, let's say the Messiah would be cut off, right? Cut off being an idiom for
Zechariah
killed.
or Daniel chapter 9.
It'd be Daniel, and I'm forgetting if it's Daniel 7 or 9. I think it's 9. Yeah.
Yeah, Daniel 9.
Right.
All right, is it your contention that Daniel 9 says the Messiah?
No, I believe. Hold on, I got to go back to it. My guess is it refers to the Son of Man.
It says a anointed one or a Mashiach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
anointed one, right? Is another way of saying Messiah. Right? Messiah means anointed one.
You got it, right. It says, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God on behalf of the holy mountain of God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, which obviously is an angel, whom I've seen before in a vision, came to me in swift flight in the time of evening sacrifice. He came and said to me, Daniel, I have now come out to give you wisdom and understanding. At the beginning of your supplication, a word went out, and I have come to declare it. For you are greatly beloved. Consider the word and understand the vision. 70 weeks are decreed for your people in your holy city to finish transgression and put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the time of an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and for 62 weeks it shall be built again with streets and a moat, but in troubled time. After 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the troops of the anointed prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of a week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease. In the place, and in their place shall be a desolating sacrilege, until the decree is poured out upon the desolator. Now, it didn't actually say Messiah in here. There's 2 different anointed ones. Did you catch it? It says, know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem until the time of an anointed prince. When did the word go out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem?
Give him a second because he is teacup.
Oh, we lost him.
I'm sure he's still here. Just give him a second, though. But guys,
Did we
these
lose you,
numbers are
Tyler?
looking pretty low. Let's go ahead and tap the screen.
I actually, I
Can you
forgot.
hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened there. Sorry. I was saying like it cut out for some reason right when you asked the question. So forgive me. Do you mind if you ask just the question portion of that?
Yeah, so according to the passage, it says, from the time that the word went out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem until the time of an anointed prince. When did the word go out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem?
Well, most would talk about when King Artaxerxes had made the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem.
Can you show me in the Bible where Artaxerxes gave a decree to rebuild Jerusalem?
I don't recall.
It's not in there. What we do have is a decree from King Cyrus.
I don't recall it being in the Bible.
We have one from King Cyrus, and we also have a prophecy about it. Two of them actually from Isaiah. The first one is Isaiah 44. God says, who confirms the word of his servant and fulfills the prediction of his messengers? Who says of Jerusalem, it shall be inhabited, and the cities of Judah, they shall be rebuilt. I will raise up their ruins. Who says to the deep, be dry? I will dry up your rivers. Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall carry out all of my purpose? And who says of Jerusalem, it shall be rebuilt, and of a temple your foundation shall be laid? Which also holds more specifically to Isaiah chapter 45, the next chapter, where he more concisely says, I have aroused Cyrus in righteousness, and I will make all of his paths straight. He shall build my city and set my exiles free. So God just tells you beforehand that the person who's going to rebuild the city is King Cyrus, which is why we find in the book of Ezra and in the book of 2 Chronicles that it's the decree of Cyrus. It says, in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord from the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also in writing, saying, thus saith the king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the... which I read the Cyrus prism. That's not what it says, but it says, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. And this actually is repeated again in Josephus. Josephus has the same letter. In Josephus's letter, it says that Cyrus commanded the rebuilding of the city and the temple.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, and so I'm sorry. So I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry. I didn't say why.
No one disputes the Cyrus decree.
Sorry, I didn't get to the point. My point being is that Cyrus, if he's the fulfillment of this, means that Cyrus in 539 gave the command, which means you've got a big problem, because after 70 weeks, 77s, you get nowhere close to Jesus. That's 490 years. So let me get my calculator out. If we do 539 minus about 490, we've got about 50 BCE. So I'll tell you what scholars conclude. Most scholars conclude that this is written in the 2nd century, right as the Macabbean revolt is happening. The first anointed leader is either Zerubbabel or Joshua. Both of them were anointed when the holy place was anointed. So Joshua was the first high priest of the temple when it was rebuilt. And then later, the second anointed down here is Onias III. Onias III was the last priest before Antiochus Epiphanes rolled into town after defeating Ptolemy in Egypt. And Antiochus Epiphanes IV exiled Onias and had him executed, and then he made a deal with Onias' the successor named Jason. And the deal that he made with Jason, which you could read in First Maccabees chapters 1 through 3 and Second Maccabees chapter 4, is that there would be an end to the offerings and sacrifices in the temple. And then there was a statue of Zeus that was set up. This statue was referred to as a desolation. That's right. It was referred to as a desolation. And so the offerings and sacrifices, according to the book of Maccabees, did cease for exactly half a week until the Maccabean revolt. And then under the leadership of Judas Maccabeus, they were actually successful. And after that half a week was over, they actually defeated Antiochus Epiphanes, and they reinstituted the sacrifices and offerings again. So everything in Daniel chapter 9, according to what we read in the history of the 2nd century and even the language of the text, because this text was written in Hasmonean Hebrew. It wasn't written in Aramaic. And Hasmonean Hebrew was instituted after the Maccabean revolt, directly after. Everything about this text tells us that it was just written during the Maccabean revolt.
Okay. Yeah, and my bailiwick is not, Old Testament textual criticism, so that'd be an interesting thing to study. I don't know what the original text was written in, so I can't comment. But that's an interesting point.
So I think we can put Daniel chapter 9 aside, but there's a lot of prophecies about Jesus in the New Testament. Do you have any favorites?
I'm trying to think through some ones that I think would be at least maybe compelling. What do you think of where the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem?
Micah chapter 5?
Micah.
Yeah.
I think it's 5:2, right? Mm-hmm. Am I getting that?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on here. Let me see.
So Micah 5:2 is kind of a troubling passage. It's mentioned in Matthew chapter 2. Mm-hmm. Is it chapter 2, chapter 1? I forget now. It's early in chapter 2, I thought. Yeah. Somewhere like 2:13 or something. But it says, but you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from old, from ancient of days. Now, to me, this means that whoever this is has to be an actual ruler in Israel, right?
Well, I guess. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not equivocating. I mean, the Christian theology would say that Christ is the ruler, right, of New Israel, right, being the church age.
But that's
right?
in the future.
I am a replacement theologian, so I do believe that what manifests Israel. I actually personally believe that this is what Paul wrote about in Romans. Was that indeed what was broken off was, right, the church age would be grafted in.
Right, but that's still to come,
right?
right?
But I'll acknowledge what you're saying, yes.
Okay, so then this couldn't have been fulfilled yet.
There's a kingdom theology that there is the now and the yet to come as well. So that there is a kingdom that is now, right, but it's not the full manifestation of the kingdom.
Right, but the fact of the matter is, it didn't happen yet
of that kingdom. Well, the full manifestation of that kingdom has not happened yet, but he is the ruler of that kingdom.
Yeah, but
and it began its unfolding.
But if it haven't happened yet, that means it's not fulfilled.
Well, Christ said the kingdom is now, right?
Right, but did he rule in Israel?
The kingdom is upon you. Did he? Well. Again, we would argue that he rules, but not from a geopolitical standpoint.
Is he ruling in Israel?
Religio. Yeah. Well, again, I'm a replacement theologian, so yeah, I would say that Israel, right? Then there is a new Israel, and the new Israel is the church. So when Paul talks about, right, that you've been grafted in, and that there are many that were broken off, so that you would be grafted in. And establishing that. No, I know that there's a lot of people that eschew the replacement theology, so I'm not speaking on behalf of all of Christendom, but yeah, I would argue, from my vantage, from my theology, right, is that indeed he is ruler of the new Israel.
But it doesn't say new Israel. It doesn't say figurative Israel. It says he's going to rule in Israel, which is in line with what the other prophets say. And if you go down, it says he will stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, which means whoever this is, he's got a God, and his God is Yahweh. In the name of Yahweh his God, they shall live secure. Did the Israelites live secure under Jesus' leadership?
Yeah, not yet. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Again, the full manifestation of the kingdom that Christ when he reigns, right? Many believe in the millennial reign. I do subscribe to that, but I'm not an expert in the eschatology. But there would be an actual rule here on earth that is more of a geopolitical rule.
sure. So if it didn't happen yet, then it's not fulfilled.
That would be an actual geopolitical rule. Sure. That's not fulfilled, but it's the being born in Bethlehem. From out of Bethlehem would come the one that would be the ruler, right?
Well,
and that Jesus
that's
would
not
be
special
born.
to me.
And Bethlehem was a yeah.
Being born in
I
Bethlehem
understand.
is a
It may not
useless
be that
prophecy
special,
for
but
me.
Bethlehem was a very small town, right? So the probabilities that somebody would come. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. There was a
I said being born in Bethlehem
a
is
money sound or something.
well, being born in Bethlehem is useless to me. Like if I gave a prophecy and I said the next president of the United States is going to be born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then somebody was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but they were never the president, the prophecy didn't come true.
I guess that's right. The fullness of that prophecy has not come true, right? It's just the being born in Bethlehem, the
Right.
ruler who would rule. So no,
Cool.
but I'll give you that.
Right.
That's fair.
So when he comes back to rule, then he fulfilled the prophecy. So, but this is more important. Zechariah 9:9 touches on this. According to Matthew 21, this prophecy was fulfilled when Jesus rode the double donkeys. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations, and his dominion shall be from sea to sea." Now, certainly none of this happened when Jesus was here.
Yeah, and by the way, I actually don't believe that the riding on a colt is compelling, because that's something that they could choose to bring about themselves, right? So
I rode a
that's not
donkey too.
Divine providence, right? You could, yeah, right, exactly, right. So if somebody said that you're supposed to ride a donkey, you just choose to ride a donkey. So I've always shied away from using that prophecy, because I don't think that that's a very compelling one. But yeah,
I agree. I don't think it's very compelling, but unfortunately, I find all of the prophecies kind of like this. Let's do one that we haven't done in a while, because I know you're new here, but for the people who's not new here, we talk about prophecies. I got to say every night. Is it every night, guys?
Every time you're alive, my darling.
Right.
this is an every night podcast. This is cool. I love that you guys are having this discussion.
Well,
That's
it's not. I mean, every night that we're live doing this, we cover this. But I want to talk about Jeremiah. There's a prophecy in Matthew chapter 3 that comes from the book of Jeremiah.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you say the Jeremiah passage?
Yeah, I think
Can you say the Jeremiah passage again, because it cut out for some reason. My internet's cutting out or something.
Yeah, it's in Matthew chapter 3.
What was the Jeremiah passage?
I think it's Jeremiah 15. Give me a second. I'll pull it up. I've got it marked in my Bible here. Jeremiah.
Something about old pages.
I still love a paper Bible. I know I have like notes on the computer, but I still, my preference, like if I could just take my Bible and use that, I probably would. So Jeremiah 31:15 is what I was looking for. All right, and this is going to be, I apologize, I said Matthew 3, but it's going to be Matthew 2. There we go. And it's going to be Matthew 2:18. And this is when Herod had the babies unalived. It said, then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, a wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. So Matthew is leading us to believe that there's a prophecy suggesting that, I don't know, around the time that the Messiah is going to be born, that there would be weeping in Ramah and lamentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we go to Jeremiah 31... go for it. Mm-hmm.
What's the Matthean passage?
Oh, it's Matthew 2:18, 17 and 18.
Okay. So, and I'm sorry, what's the case that we're making then? I'm not fully understanding the argument.
This talks about when the babies were executed by Herod. It says, Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, and he was infuriated, and he sent and unalived all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children, right? So he's leading us to believe that Jeremiah prophesied this particular event, right?
Right.
Right. Now, if we go to that reference in Jeremiah 31:15, what we actually find is the opposite of that. We find a passage where God is consoling the mothers of the Israelites as they're being carried off into Babylonian captivity, because they will come back. He's promising that even though they're being carried away, that they're going to come back. So it says, we can start in verse 15. Thus saith the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Thus saith the Lord, keep your voice from weeping, your eyes from tears. For there is a reward for your work, says the Lord. They shall come back from the land of the enemy. There is hope for your future, says the Lord. Your children shall come back from their own country. So the prophecy here is not at all about the Messiah. It's about how the Israelites are going to come back from Babylon.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, so the context of that is indeed that. So I guess I'm not sure what we're trying to argue as far as.
I'm sorry. Give me just a second, Tyler.
Yeah.
Marine, the main reason why I'm not bringing you up is because Host doesn't speak Quran. He speaks Bible. That's why he has guest and his twin brother up here. I'm actually about to drop his twin brother because people are thinking this is an open panel.
Is he complaining about why I won't let him up while I'm talking to somebody else?
Yes, because they want to speak the Quran, but Ems only speaks the Quran, not the Bible, which is why he is mute. So with that being said, you need to respect this space. We are discussing the Bible. It is technically a one-on-one. You are not
and we're having
special to be brought up here just because.
Yeah, we're having a delightful conversation about the Bible. I don't know why he thinks that I'm going to end my current conversation to talk to him. That's crazy.
Also, do you want to know a fun fact, gentlemen?
Mm-hmm.
Magi worked for pharaohs.
Oh,
alongside the Kholakitai.
Yeah, that's a good site. Hanji, there's some Egyptian stuff we need to talk about soon. Okay. We need to. There's some stuff. Okay. I don't want to get sidetracked. Okay, so this passage here is it's a prophecy about how the Israelites are going to come back from the Babylonian captivity, right?
Right.
Right, okay. So what it's not is a prophecy about how the babies in Bethlehem are going to be executed.
Right. Yeah. No, and right there's so often they will use these as analogies and let's say Matthew, right? He's taking a license to apply this as a messianic prophecy, right? You wouldn't immediately interpret that there. I haven't studied this one in depth, but it'd be interesting if you guys have these discussions each night. I'd be happy to go even look up and see what others have said about it. But there are often times where we read passages in the Old Testament that while we wouldn't at first blush consider them messianic, there were Hebraic scholars even that preceded Jesus that did apply them messianically. I don't know about this one in particular.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with most of their works. I read them a lot when I was still a Christian. Let's do one more prophecy. This is one of my favorite prophecies, and it takes a little bit of time to read through it, but I promise it's worth the read. Okay? We're going to read the Old Testament passage from Zechariah chapter 12. And guys, we haven't talked about this one in a while, but let's read the passage. I won't belabor it. We'll go through it rather quickly. It says, the word of the Lord concerning Israel, thus saith the Lord, who stretched out the heavens and founded the earth and formed the human spirit within. See, I'm about to make Jerusalem a cup of reeling for all of the surroundings people. It will be against Judah and also in the siege against Jerusalem. So he's saying there's going to be a war, right? And it says, on that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the people. All who lift it shall grievously hurt themselves. And all the nations of the earth shall come together against it. So now this sounds like the end times battle. All the nations of the earth are going to come against Israel and Judea. It says, on that day, says the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. But on the house of Judah, I will keep a watchful eye when I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. Then the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts. Okay, so God's going to rescue them even in the midst of the battle. Then he says, on that day I will make the clans of Judah like a blazing pot on a pile of wood, like a flaming torch among the sheaves, and they shall devour to the right and to the left all of the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. Easy enough. God's going to save Jerusalem. And the Lord will save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not be exalted over that of Judah. On that day the Lord shall shield the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, and like the angel of the Lord at their head. And on that day I will seek to destroy all of the nations that come against Jerusalem. So this is the end time, right?
Here, speak up. Tyler, there you go.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. For some reason, I'm getting like a bad connection. It keeps cutting out, so forgive me for that.
Sure.
I'm sorry. You're asking if it's asking about the end time?
Yeah, but the final battle. It says all.
Yeah,
all.
I presume I'm not an expert. I think so, but
Yeah. Because it says that all the nations of the earth.
Passage.
Yeah, all the nations of the earth
sorry.
will come against Jerusalem. It's Zechariah chapter 12.
Yeah. No, so that sounds fair. That sounds like Armageddon. Let's just say
For sure. And God's going to grant them victory, starting with Judah, and so on and so forth. Now, this is really interesting. It says, and on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem, and I will pour out a spirit of compassion and supplication on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that they will look on the one whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child and weeps bitterly over him who weeps over a firstborn. So what's your interpretation of this?
Of the mourning of the one they have pierced?
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, this is not an area of my expertise. I've tended to hear that, right, this is the idea that they will then, the revelation of Christ will happen at this time, and then people will understand then who he was and what they had done. And so there will be an understanding of that they had crucified him.
Right, after the final battle.
Correct.
Right, okay, so this isn't something that's happened yet. This is an end times event.
Oh, yeah, correct, yeah.
Cool. So,
I don't know of anyone that's argued that that's a fulfilled prophecy, if that's what the argument is for.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is what John tells us in John 19, when it refers to what happened to Jesus on the cross. Says, because it was the day of preparation, the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because the Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But they came to Jesus and saw that he was already unalive, and they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this testified so that you may also believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth so that you may also continue to believe. These things occurred so that the scripture might be fulfilled. None of his bones shall be broken. And again, another passage of scripture says they will look upon the one whom they have pierced, which is a quotation from Zechariah chapter 12. But that couldn't have been fulfilled when the Roman soldiers looked upon Jesus, because that was clearly about the end times.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess I would just, to giving John the benefit of the doubt, he's just saying that this is the precursor to the fulfillment of that, right? In the sense that yeah, he was pierced. This is like the fulfillment of this thing. I'm sorry, I'm trying to use the right language, but in order for that to be fulfilled, right, Christ needed to be pierced, and he was pierced.
Right. But in order for this prophecy to make sense, you have to assume that now there's a secondary meaning that's not about what it actually means, which is about the end times.
Yeah, well, right. But okay, so if we take the interpretation that at least I'm having, and again, you're talking to somebody, this is not my area of expertise, right? But I've always understood this, right? Is that it's the understanding of at the conclusion or the culmination of the Battle of Armageddon, the revelation of Jesus Christ at his second coming, they will then be able to look upon Jesus whom they had pierced, right? And so the piercing, though, we know happened right in first century Jerusalem. So at the fulfillment of the cross for Christ. So the piercing was fulfilled at that point. But that the ultimate, like where the end Armageddon thing has not yet happened. So John is saying, right, for the fulfillment of this, right, Christ needed to be pierced, and it happened.
Right, but
he was pierced.
But it says that the prophecy was fulfilled when they pierced him on the cross.
Yeah, I'm saying it was fulfilled in the sense of, sorry, this sounds, maybe I sound like I'm equivocating, and I don't mean to. It was fulfilled that he was pierced. So the pierced part has been fulfilled, but not the final Armageddon battle and the revelation of Christ. But anyway, again, you're talking to somebody, this is not my bailiwick, so it's interesting discussion. But
yeah.
You've got me wanting to study it, just participate in these discussions, because it's cool that you guys are doing this.
I'll give you one more. This one's short. Hosea 11 says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more that I called them, the more that they went from me, and they kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Is that history, or is that a prophecy?
Sorry, hold on. I'm trying to go to that passage. Hosea what?
Hosea 11:1.
Shoot, I am having internet troubles here.
It's okay. Take your time.
It is on the screen.
Oh. I call my son. So, okay. Yeah, I would want to read the whole chapter just to understand the context. So, but it sounds like it's referring to Jerusalem right there, right? But then, yeah, there were, and again, this is not an area, I read one book, like, gosh, it was probably even like 20 years ago, that went through some of the Hebraic passages showing that even prior to preceding Jesus, that there were a lot of Messianic interpretations of a lot of Old Testament passages.
Yeah, so like I'm quite familiar with the many interpretations of the Talmudic writers and the Pesharim, like what we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If we conclude that any possible interpretation is possible just because somebody posited, then I think it leads to like absurdities. Because like if you read the Pesharim on the book of Habakkuk, or I'm sorry, the book of Haggai in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they make wild assertions about what the meaning of the text is based on this idea that, well, the text has like a secondary hidden meaning to it. It doesn't mean what it actually says. But so if you read all of the Jewish literature on like these secondary meanings, none of their predictions ever come true. It's just a wild goose chase because they're like, listen, these prophecies didn't come true. Like Zephaniah is a good example. The entire book of Zephaniah is a failure of prophecy. And so we've got like people interpreting Zephaniah. Well, it couldn't be a failed prophecy. It must be reinterpreted now. But if we read those reinterpretations, they don't come true either. So the New Testament authors, they were just doing what the other Jewish people were doing at the time period, saying, well, this must mean something other than what it actually says, so let's just make something up. But what we find here is not a prophecy. Prophecy starts down here, actually, in verse 5. So it says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son, and the more that I called them, the more that they went from me, and they kept sacrificing to the Baals and to the idols, which is what happened during the Exodus. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, God says that Israel is my firstborn son, and he's bringing them out of Egypt, which is why he goes on to say, yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk, and I took them by my arms, but they did not know that it was I that healed them. So God's laying a groundwork. I was a good father. They were a bad son, which is why in verse 5, it says, they shall return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria shall be their king. So God is, in these first 4 verses, he's laying the groundwork, the justification for why he's about to punish them. See what I mean? So if this is history, if God is recounting history in order to get to the oracle, then that means this little piece of history is not a prophecy. This is just history. So when I go to the book of Matthew, and Matthew says, let me grab it in Matthew real quick. In Matthew, there we go. It says, Joseph got up and took the child and his mother by night and went to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, out of Egypt I have called my son. To me, when I read this in Matthew, I'm saying Matthew is an absolute lunatic because this is not even a prophecy. This is a recounting of history. And this kind of sums up my issue with all the prophecies of Jesus. So I've been through every single prophecy about Jesus in the New Testament, every single one, and all of them are just like this. They're random, out of context quotations from the Old Testament. And to me, it's kind of embarrassing because we have clear predictions about what the Messiah is going to do in the Old Testament, like Jeremiah 33 and Ezekiel 36 and 37, where it says, let's do 37. We haven't done that one today. It says that he's going to collect the people of Israel and bring them back to the land, and he's going to restore the 2 kingdoms again. My servant David will be king over them, and they will have one shepherd, and they shall follow my ordinances and be careful to observe my statutes. They shall live in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, in which your ancestors lived, they and their children, and their children's children shall live there forever, and my servant David will be their prince forever. And there's like a dozen prophecies just like this, where God says the one from David is coming, and this is what's going to happen when he comes. But for some reason, none of those passages are quoted in the New Testament.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like Tyler teacupped again.
Yeah, I think he's got a bad connection. Master, what's your name?
Oh,
is it David?
My name is David.
David, okay.
Yeah, I am a deconverted, deconstructed fundamentalist.
Yeah, I don't know if I was ever a fundamentalist. I was never a fundamentalist, but I deconverted pretty hard. And believe it or not, the thing that deconverted me, that started my deconstruction journey, is not something that I actually talk about on a lot of my lives. The prophecies are part of them. But the thing that initially started me on my journey was reading the Hebrew texts and getting acquainted with the many, many variants. And so, for example,
and I'd like to say this to everyone listening in, to kind of make it more simply. To me, during my deconstruction period, I finally came to realize that what you're trying to say, Justin, is that, all the New Testament iterations about Jesus, it has that feeling like they just made it fit, in order to make this work, right? And so I know that in the very beginning of this discussion we had started with like inference to the best explanation, and this has
Abduction.
Abductive reasoning. And so this fits so precisely with what seems to be ubiquitous among all religion, is that this manner of speaking of trying to make it fit.
Right. So when I read the New Testament, I think that I agree with what the rabbis say. The rabbis have an analogy for this, where somebody walked into the woods, they found an arrow in a tree, and they drew a circle around the arrow and said it's a bullseye. To me, that's what's happened with Jesus. Somebody came to the conclusion that this guy must be the Messiah, and then they went back to the Old Testament and said, can I find anything in this text that sounds even remotely like Jesus, and just call it a prophecy? That's kind of what happened. But to my point, if you don't have a critical edition of the Hebrew Old Testament, this is my critical edition, although there's a new one. This is the BHS, but there's a BHQ that's in process of coming right now. It's coming in waves. That's really good. The BHQ is amazing, but I don't have the money to pay for 10 different copies of it. But like just on this one passage, this is Psalm chapter 9. Oh no, it's not going to show it. There we go. This section at the bottom, the footnotes, this entire section is nothing but textual variants. Every passage in the Old Testament are dozens and dozens of textual variants. And when I went to Bible college and seminary, I was taught to do exegesis and dissect the meaning of every single word, and to really like I can take one single word in a passage, like the erroneously translated word pierced from Psalm 22 verse 16, and I can like make a whole framework around this. But when you look at the textual variants, it's very clear that we don't actually know if like any of these specific words were in the original text, because we have so many textual variants. What we do know is that maybe the general idea was in the text, and that general ideal existed. So this idea that we can take like very specific passages of the Bible and interpret them all based on the meaning of like one word, it's a very nonsensical approach, because we don't really know what was in the original text, because we've got thousands and thousands of variants. And that's kind of what started me on my deconstruction journey, is realizing that, like, listen, if we want to know what the text says, we can only know what it kind of says. We can't know what it exactly ever said. Anyways, guys, it's 2 a.m, and unfortunately, I think Tyler lost his connection. But listen, you guys have been an absolute delight. I really enjoyed having you up here. Even though I don't know if we came to a whole lot of agreement, I think we had a really good dialogue.